Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you've ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. Since 2009, our radio program hosted guest experts from around the globe sharing their perspectives, experiences, and expertise while giving you food for thought. If you can't listen live, then download and listen to any of our 300-plus podcasts in our library at texasconflictcoach.com. So sit back, relax, or join the conversation every Tuesday evening, or tweet us at TXConflictCoach.
Hello, listeners. You know, many people have encountered great challenges and unbearable pain from intense disputes as a result of strongly held values, belief systems, and personal principles. And yet people have the courage and the ability to break through these barriers and create a common bridge. In this episode, Unbearable Conflict Requires Courageous Conversations, our guest, Eric Galton, a renowned mediator, is a catalyst for these breakthroughs, providing people with a safe environment where they can experience something different from what they knew. Now, changing how we think about our experiences is about great communication, deep listening, and hope. You will hear about stories highlighted from Galton's book, Stories Mediators Tell, and tips and strategies that will guide you in difficult situations. Now, Eric Galton is the past president of the International Academy of Mediators, a founder of the Lakeside Mediation Center in Austin, Texas, and he has been a full-time mediator for 25 years. Again, his newest book, Stories Mediators Tell, was published by the ABA, or the American Bar Association, in 2012. He is an adjunct professor at Pepperdine's Strauss Institute for Dispute Resolution and teaches advanced mediation classes. All the proceeds from his book, Stories Mediators Tell, are donated to the ABA section of dispute resolution to advance the use of mediation. We will certainly be talking more about that book. Now, we are taking your feedback, comments, and questions. You can do that in a number of ways. You can dial in directly at 347-324-3591. Press the number 1 key on your dial pad to speak with us. You can also Twitter me at TXConflictCoach, or join us in the open chat room. We've got that open right now at blogtalkradio.com/Texas-conflict-coach. We have some folks in the chat room now, so thank you and welcome to joining us there. So, Eric, thank you so much for being part of our program tonight.
Really glad to be with you, Patty.
Well, you know, we've been posting and marketing and letting people know that you're going to be on the show tonight, and we got a number of comments, but the latest one we had is, Eric Galton, he's da bomb, and I just started laughing. I said, yes, he is da bomb. So I'm so glad that you're here. You have a wonderful international reputation, and I feel incredibly honored for you to be able to share with our listeners your expertise and your experiences.
Really delighted to be here. Hope I can be of assistance.
Well, you will be. And let's just start off by asking, you know, you've been practicing for over 25 years, and what continues to motivate you and your passion for this work? Because this is hard work, and some people would really get burnt out, but you're still with us in this field. So what motivates you then?
Well, you know, as Jerry Garcia would say, you know, what a long, strange trip it's been. In the early to mid-'80s, when most of the people I know were confusing mediation with meditation, I don't think that anyone would have visualized the progress of the mediation movement, how far it's come. And it's been an interesting journey. A lot of skeptics, a lot of people who didn't believe, a lot of people who thought it would be impossible to integrate mediation into our justice system, into our schools. But, you know, most of the early pioneers were people who liked to hear the word no, because when people say no, it sort of encourages you to sort of work harder to get to that goal. But what's really splendid about this whole chapter is that today, at 62 years of age and working 4 to 5 days a week with people in deep conflict, for over 20 years, I really love my job. I can't wait to go to work and do it. And I think the thing that motivates me the most, if I were to narrow it down to one thing, is the longer you work in the conflict resolution field, the better you understand the damage it does to people and how it impacts people in all facets of their lives, whether it's their work, whether it's their health, whether it's their familial relationships, whatever it is. And so, when people are kind enough to hire me to mediate a case for them or a dispute for them, what I basically take to heart is this is the most important or most serious thing that's going on in their lives. It's what's impacting their lives, usually in negative and horrible ways. And if you can play any part in helping them through that, then it's a really valuable goal. So, I practiced as a litigator for the first 15 years of my professional life, and I'd often come home and wonder, well, what have I done to advance the ball of society? And I'm not dishonoring lawyers by saying that. I work with them all the time, and I really respect what they do. But I didn't have that sense of fulfillment. I come home from mediation typically very tired, having deeply listened, but I also feel very energized because I feel as if the parties have really made progress in improving their lives, and to be any part of that is pretty awesome.
And I would agree. After 20 years of being in this field, it is a passion and a motivation, and it's different for each person, and yet you continue to go full steam with all that you're doing. I mean, we were just talking a few minutes ago, you're traveling to Canada and you're speaking internationally. You've written this wonderful book, a number of books, but the Stories Mediators Tell, and then you're teaching and you're mediating these cases. And so we're going to talk about some of the stories, so thank you for just sharing that. Now, you have, over the course of time, mediated some very difficult and complex cases which have caused people to be in these very unbearable situations and pains. And it's up to you what you want to share around stories, because I know the confidential nature of that. But what dynamics have to be present to help parties break through these tough barriers? Because you as we mentioned earlier, you're the catalyst for these breakthroughs as a mediator. So what dynamics have to be present to help parties break through these really, really tough barriers?
Well, I can give you a few case illustrations that are non-specific that won't violate confidentiality. But as you were talking, the case and the story that comes most to mind, it's not a story in the book, but it's something that impacted me in a rather profound way, were 400 hemophiliacs who had contracted HIV or Hep C or AIDS as a result of exposure to certain blood transfusion products. And those products were manufactured by 4 of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. Well, when you get a call from a group of lawyers who say, we're interested in you being the person to mediate that case, you almost realize without knowing anything just the unbearable emotional scale of that issue. I mean, here are people due to a genetic disease who require transfusions, who either got sick and died, or in some instances communicated these illnesses to their spouses or significant others, or a brother who was losing a sister, or a sister who was losing a brother, so much so that the people within the hemophiliac community referred to it as the hemophiliac Holocaust. And so when you get a call like that, you sort of know instantly, despite your level of experience, that you're dealing with forces and factors that you may not completely understand within the knowledge that you possess. So, the first step is sort of constructing a process that's designed to meet the specific needs of that particular problem, large as it may be. And so I told the lawyers I wanted to meet with the steering committee of the hemophiliacs and their counsel, and I wanted to have a private meeting with the drug companies and their counsel to sort of assess What is it that everyone is expecting or wanting to come from this process, and what needs to happen? And interestingly, in my meetings with the steering committee, these were all people who had been afflicted with these diseases as a result of the transfusion. I learned that, while there were very real economic needs that motivated these people, they were interested in a lot of other things. The community they represented felt as if they were invisible. They had never been heard, and they wanted to be heard, and they did not want to be ignored. They wanted to be identified. They wanted to tell their stories, and they wanted to tell their stories to people from the drug companies who really mattered, not somebody who was insignificant. So either CEOs or CFOs. They wanted them to understand what had happened to either them or their families or their community. And so that was a very, very important interest that was identified, and it was something that really needed to happen. In meeting with the drug companies and with having been authorized to let them know that was something of interest, what the drug companies didn't know is, how do we, when we listen to what these people have to say, communicate back? And that's where I think sometimes the mediator can become a catalyst. It's not about us, it's about them. But at that moment, I remember telling them, well, you spent all this money hiring expert witnesses who will testify in court. Have you ever thought of hiring a consulting expert who will help you understand what these people have gone through, and also will help you understand how to communicate with them effectively? So they hired a really, really wonderful psychologist who deals with victims of mass tragedies and retain them solely for the purpose of really understanding who their audience is, how they feel, and how to communicate. And in structuring the mediation, and I know this is longer than you probably wanted, what we did was we reserved the entire first day, not for negotiating, but only for storytelling. And when I talk about the unbearable moments at mediation, I'm also talking about the courage. These were people who actually got up and explained in very raw but very real and very human terms what had happened to them in their lives. And as a neutral, when I heard one story that I thought was the worst story I could ever hear, I'd hear another one. And it ended at we started at 9 in the morning. It didn't end until like 9 o'clock at night when a 16-year-old girl walked across the hall to these 4 representatives of these companies and handed them a teddy bear that her brother had held the night he passed away. And she gave it to them and said, I want you to hold this. I want you to understand and feel what he felt. We had about a 15-minute gap before the folks from the pharmaceutical companies spoke. And one of the things they decided to do was for them to speak and not have their lawyers speak. And one of them got up and looked across the table at 400 people and said, there is no way I can imagine the pain that your families and your community's gone through. But more than anything, I want to tell you that we made mistakes. We regret those mistakes. We're sorry for those mistakes, and we're going to attempt to do everything we can over the next 4 or 5 days to try to make this as right as we can, knowing that we can never make it right. As everyone was exiting somewhere around 11 o'clock that night, some of the families came over to me and said, whether we settle the case economically or not, the most important thing just happened. We needed to tell our stories, and we needed to hear them say that. Fascinatingly, the next morning, I get a call from the steering committee. Can the drug companies, without their lawyers, meet with me so we can talk about some emergency legislation that we're trying to get passed on Capitol Hill? Everyone agrees. The drug companies agreed to use their lobbyists to pass that emergency legislation, whether these civil lawsuits settled or not. whether there was an economic settlement or not. The next day, that emergency bill was passed, and not surprisingly, 2 days later, the entire matter was resolved. Resolved with people feeling as if they had participated in a just process. The P.S. to this story, and it will be the last thing I'll say about it, is one of the elements of agreements that was that the drug companies and the hemophiliac community would form a committee that would meet together 2 or 3 times a year futuristically to make sure that the needs of these communities were understood and met and to avoid conflicts. To this day, those groups still meet.
It gives me goosebumps just hearing your story of your engagement in that process and designing a process, constructing a process that allowed them that safe environment, that allowed them to really do what was most important, which is, as you said, the storytelling part and being heard and understood, and being able to do that. And any really successful mediator, conflict management practitioner is going to be that catalyst, as you said, to help them communicate with each other. And I can only imagine that as those number of people were sitting in that large room sharing, like you said, the courage that it takes. That's one of those dynamics, when we talk about, what has to be present. It's not, like you said, about me, the mediator. It's really about the parties and how's the mediator that catalyst. And that's what I'm hearing you say as you were explaining and sharing this with the listening audience. It's what the parties bring that they need, but that courage to be able to participate, and not just the courage of those who were perceived as the targets or the victims or the ones that feel like they didn't have a voice, but it took a lot of courage for those drug companies to be able to really sit back and listen and not, as you said, have the attorneys respond. But it sounds like they also took some ownership, recognized some of their own contribution to the situation, which I'm sure also went a long way in helping the parties move forward. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, there was courage across the board, and you stated it even better than I ever could. It's moments like that, because I remember we finished at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night, and I found out I hadn't been home for a while. I could catch a 12:30 red eye back from Los Angeles to Austin, and so all I can do is I remember getting on the plane, and I was exhausted just experiencing the energy of all these people and also the exhilaration of them coming to this incredible agreement. And all I remember thinking to myself was, I just can't believe I get paid to do this.
Absolutely. Now, we have a lot of listeners who are from the dispute resolution field, and from what you've just said, what would be a statement that you could tell our dispute resolution practitioners listening in right now about the way that you work in the storytelling, and especially from this case? What did you learn that would be the most little tidbit or a significant element that you could share with our dispute resolution practitioners?
That every dispute is situational. I've heard people say things like mediations are like snowflakes. They're all just a little bit different. So I think that you have to be willing to understand that one size does not fit all disputes, one style does not fit all disputes, one structure does not fit all disputes, and we become more of a process architect. So one of the things I've learned to do over time, and it wasn't easy, is I've learned to get entirely out of my comfort zone. I think to some extent neutrals over time, or dispute resolution professionals over time, find things that are winning most of the time. And while they may be effective strategies to deal with disputes, they also can become heavy coats that you wear, and they sort of stifle out the ability to be more innovative and be more creative. When I mediate tomorrow, which I'm going to be doing in Austin before I fly to Los Angeles, I really start the day with a very clean slate, entirely open to how am I going to deal with this particular dispute. And typically I'll sort of reach that conclusion after I physically see the parties, hear something of what they have to say and do a better assessment of what their needs and interests actually are, rather than having a predetermined script that I'm going to use most of the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, it gives you the most flexibility and also strength in where the client is and what they most need, being client, but all parties involved. So I'm going to let listeners know that you are tuned in to the Texas Conflict Coach Blog Talk radio program, and I'm speaking with Eric Galton, who is not only the founder of Lakeside Mediation Center in Austin, but the co-author of Stories Mediators Tell. And so tell us about the book, Stories Mediators Tell, because it has a significance to you. So talk a little bit about that significance.
Well, I really have to give most of the credit to my co-editor, the great Professor Leela Love from Cardozo Law School. I've known Leela for about 20 years, and she's one of the past chairs of the ABA section of dispute resolution. And she and I had done a lot of teaching together about storytelling, which is one of her real interests. And rightfully or wrongfully, she thought I was a pretty good storyteller, and she also knew I was a pretty active and writer, and I like to write a great deal. So she had been after me for a long time to do a book about storytelling and allowing mediators to take real cases that they mediated, fictionalize them to some extent to preserve confidentiality, and make those stories available not just for dispute resolution professionals, not just for lawyers, but for the general public, so that they could begin to assess and understand what mediation is really all about and the power of mediation as it's told in sort of real time by mediators who have worked on some pretty tough or interesting or funny cases. The other part of it was to make sure that it wasn't a mediation's greatest thing through sliced toast, and it always works. And to point out with some of the stories things that mediators tried that didn't work or they weren't successful. And so we identified about 30 or 40 potential mediators who we were familiar with and invited them to be storytellers and basically do it in two parts. Write the story and then write what they basically considered to be the teaching points from what they learned or what they thought the audience might learn as a result of that story and what happened. And we got these really amazing contributions. It was the best-selling book for the ABA section of dispute resolution, and probably one of the best-selling books for the ABA. And we decided to donate all the proceeds to it to the ABA section of dispute resolution for purposes of research and advancing the cause of mediation. And I guess the really cool part was it did so well that we're now working on the international version called Stories Mediators Tell World Edition. And we've got 35 contributors from 4 different continents and I think 16 foreign countries who are telling about their experiences mediating in the UK or mediating in New Zealand or France. We've got some from South America, some from India, because one of the things that's really joyous about this is that this is no longer a Texas movement. It's no longer a national movement. This is an international movement. And, mediation is vibrantly used in Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, now Italy, in India, in Argentina. And what's stunning is that many of these developing and emerging countries who are using mediation are looking at the adventure of the United States that started in the mid-'80s as a source of inspiration and teaching and education to advance their own movements consistent with the cultural realities in their countries.
Right. Oh, I'm excited about this new World Edition. So, folks, if you want to check the Stories Mediators Tell, you can find it not only on the lakesidemediation.com website. You can find it on the radio show page for Eric Galton. There's a number of ways. You can also get it through the ABA and through Amazon.com, but all the proceeds will go to the ABA dispute resolution section. That's a wonderful thing. I'll be looking for the World Edition, so that's wonderful. Now, you have also also, in our conversations together, you have started to have a little bit of a different interest in working with some family businesses deal with conflict. I've been hearing more and more, and we've had a number of shows on family business conflict. What is it you want listeners to know about your discoveries in mediating these types of very complex and dynamic family situations?
Well, the first thing that's been sort of enlightening about it all is that people are finally understanding that you do not need to be in litigation or have a lawyer to access the mediation system. We did a survey about 15 or 16 years ago through the University of Texas Department of Business, and while people had a very favorable reaction to mediation, the vast majority of respondents thought that you had to have a lawyer in order to go into mediation, and that's clearly not the case. It's really never been the case. So what you're beginning to see, especially with families that have people in, say, the 35 to 50-year age bracket who are working in family-owned businesses, they've actually been more exposed to mediation. They've heard about mediation, and so some of these cases have fallen into my lap. Now, where did the cases come from? The cases have come from two places. Either the families have had public accountants or financial advisors who understand that the families are going to go through a transition and probably need a facilitator to help them figure out what that transition is going to look like, or they have come from psychologists or therapists who understand that the concept of the transition is creating emotional stressors within the family, and they have been fairly large and vocal advocates that before the family interest and the family relationships are potentially severed through litigation, to try the mediation route to see whether or not those issues can be resolved. So they're different than the normal cases I mediate because the parties show up without lawyers. They have to understand, and they sign documents to acknowledge that I'm not providing them legal advice. And also, I encourage all of them to actually seek legal counsel as we're beginning to develop the agreement, because they may want the assurance that whatever it is we're doing is done correctly and done with some advice and counsel that, frankly, I can't give them as a neutral in the case. And these are not done in 8-hour days. These are done over a period of time. So, for example, in one instance, I met with the extended family for 4 hours, not to negotiate, but just to get to know them, get to know more about their business, understand what their goals were in the mediation process, wanted to understand what they wanted to avoid, and then I would meet privately on separate occasions with different family members to identify their worries, their concerns, their hopes, their nightmares, and then basically developed an agenda where week by week or every other week by every other week, we'd start building the platform of an agreement. And we sort of started on the ground floor, just like you build a house, and created a foundation that everyone could buy in. Foundation might be just a matter of principles, which is we really want to keep the family together. We want to avoid conflict. We want to find a way to constructively work through some of the issues that we have some differences of opinion on, and then from there actually constructed what the transition might look like. Along the way, all of them, in fact, in that particular case, had separate legal counsel, got legal advice, and the lawyers were very helpful. They were allies to the process as opposed to opponents, and in a few instances suggested some ideas or creative thoughts that really were helpful to the final resolution.
I like, again, with the uniqueness of every family business is so unique and so dynamic, and I liked what you said earlier about being a process architect, because you get to be very innovative, as you said, and creative in designing a process that fits for that family and that family business and the unique dynamics that come with that. And so I can imagine why you might be very passionate in dealing with some of these types of family businesses. But I think there is definitely an increased awareness with family businesses that there's other support out there for them without the feeling that they have to go through the court system or are required to go a different route. So we're coming to a close, and as we're doing that, we usually give folks a call to action or an assignment for the week. So is there one or two tips that come to mind that would be useful to listeners that they could take as an action step after they hang up the call and they're like, I need to do that? What would that be from your perspective?
Well, I think for the dispute resolution professionals who are listening, I want to get a plug in for something that I think is a serious matter and maybe should an entire discussion ought to be devoted to it. In certain sectors of the country, there is a movement afoot to sort of abdicate doing the general session at mediation when people actually sit together, communicate, and talk. And it doesn't happen at all. This is primarily occurring in Southern California, particularly in Los Angeles, but it's beginning to spread and mutate into other sectors of the country. For my dispute resolution friends, and I've got a lot of them, and many of them are a lot smarter than me, my only call to action is this is a very dangerous thing to have happen, and I think it's our obligations as stewards of the process to nip this trend in the bud. We really need to push back. This is not part of the facilitative evaluative debate. This is a structural dismantling of the heart and soul of the mediation process. And the most sad thing about it is it really disempowers people instead of empowering the people. And so for anyone who's privileged enough to handle the affairs of people in mediation, the one thing I always remind myself is it's about the people, stupid. It's about them, and their interests really need to be defended and maintained. So I'm hopeful that many of your listeners would agree with that and would do what they can to educate users about the benefits of people sitting down together and communicating and making their feelings known professionally, that this is something we think is important. For the listener who's either a current disputant or might be a disputant, don't give up. The thing that 25 years in this business has taught me is there's no problem too large that can't be solved with people sitting down and really working through problems constructively, no matter how hard it is, no matter how difficult it is. The thing that's most encouraging to me is that the dispute resolution community over time has gotten better and better and better, and there are more innovative ways to work out even the most difficult problems. So don't give up hope.
Well, that's a wonderful message. And folks can what's the best way for them to reach out to you, Eric?
Well, I'm happy to give you my email. It's eric@lakesidemediation.com. And if you ever want to see what a lovely mediation center overlooking the Colorado River in Austin looks like, they can go to www.lakesidemediation.com and they can take a tour.
Oh, that's wonderful. I've actually physically seen, your outside building over the lake, and it's beautiful, and it's peaceful and serene and calm, and I can only imagine the experience that they have. They're already stressed, coming in, how that sets a really nice tone over the lake and everything. All right, so lakesidemediation.com. And, Eric, as we close, what final message would you like to leave with listeners? Any additional final message?
Well, I guess for the dispute resolution people, we talked about that lake. I finished a sexual harassment case about 3 or 4 years ago, and you walk down these steps and you see this enormous lake. Well, when we were done and the matter was settled, I looked at the claimant, and she looked at me and she said, Eric, when I came in, I didn't see the lake. And to me, that symbolizes what conflict does to people. It deprives them of the joy of life, and every day being the good day that they deserve. So don't forget, when the going gets rough, you help them see the lake.
I love that. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us tonight. This was a real honor, a real pleasure, and a very, very much of value to all of our listeners out there. Have a very good night.
Hey, my privilege. Thanks so much, Patty.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you've enjoyed the program. You can find over 300 podcasts archived to listen at your own convenience at texasconflictcoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. To learn about upcoming radio programs and resources, sign up for our monthly e-newsletter.